this is part of the thing that America never did. It never really came to terms with our innate racism and our innate misogyny and all of that. So this is one way we're coming to terms with it.
The power of our democracy.
So I'll just put my biases on the table. George Carlin was the greatest comedian who ever lived. You grew up and lived an interesting life, and I've been watching some of the documentary where you're being interviewed as a young child. Tell us about that headspace. What was that like?
Well, I traveled a little bit with my dad. We would travel during the summer when I would have school off. We lived in LA here. We moved out here in '66 for my dad's career, and there were two major things that shaped my childhood and my sense of the world. One of which was certainly my dad being someone who was on TV as a child. That was the first way I experienced him. A little bit in the clubs. I'd go to Las Vegas and would see him. I saw him open for the Supremes once when I was a teensy little thing. I think I was about 6 or 7. So there was that thing, which is kind of hard to understand when you're a kid. Mostly my dad was just on the road a lot. And so he was gone a lot. We moved out in '66 and, he was always on the road, but really those first kind of formative years for me, I was about 3 years old. So age like 3 to 10, dad was gone a lot. I looked at one of his calendars once and he was gone, 30 weeks of the year or something. I mean, it was a lot. So that shaped my experience a little bit, him kind of being gone, absent father. And then he'd come home and he'd have the gifts and he'd be the kid. And, and my mom would be kind of upset about that because she'd have to be both the dad and the mom when he was gone, of course.
Right.
And then the other thing that really shaped my life experience growing up was first my mom's alcoholism, which was pretty prevalent pretty early on in my life. By the time I was 5 years old, I kind of knew something was up and there were arguments in the house, and she would personality would change when she would drink. And then as the '70s approached, LSD and cocaine came into the household, and that was my dad's stuff. My dad had always smoked pot. That wasn't an issue for my dad. He drank a little bit. That wasn't his main issue, but really cocaine was really bad. And through the '70s and part of the early '80s, he was pretty much done with it. I'd say by the early '80s. I think he did it a little bit on the road. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I think so. And that really shapes a life. And, and I think a lot of people grow up in, if not that chaos, some other kind of domestic chaos, whether it's mental health issues or domestic abuse issues or sexual abuse. A lot of us walk through chaos. And so one of the reasons I've been so open and forthright with my story about my family is because I really do believe that this is also part of the American story. Is we're kind of an average American family in that way. And I really knew that I had a privileged position to have a little bit of a soapbox to be able to share my experience and the fact that my family made it through and how we made it through, and that I made it through, even though I did have a lot of lingering effects from those days on my own behavior as a teen and in my 20s, and and mental health issues myself because of it. But I wanted people to know that they're not alone, and that even the families of the guy that you think is probably one of the smartest guys on the planet or one of the most enlightened people there is, he's still a human being who was struggling with issues at home and issues within himself.
Right. I remember my first experience in the Guelph Public Library listening to Class Clown. And I'm 10 or 11. And the seven bad word, 7 words you can't say on TV comes on. And I'm
Hmm.
howling. And the librarian comes over and says, young man, you can't do that. And I'm like, what? Like, because you have headphones on, right? You can't do this. I said, but it's funny. I don't care. This is a library. You can't laugh. So now he was arrested in 72 for that particular act,
Hmm.
using the 7 words. I didn't know this. He was arrested at a Lenny Bruce gig.
Yeah, years earlier, before I was born, my mom and dad had gone to see Lenny perform in Chicago. My dad was a troublemaker. He just was from day one. And so, what the cops would do is the part of what they would do is they would hassle any club owner that would hire Lenny because they were trying to shut down Lenny. And one way they would do that was they would try to catch underage people in the club, which would give them the power to do that. So they would check everyone's ID in the club to see if they were of age. And when they got to my dad, he told them that he didn't believe in identification and he refused to show them. And they threw him in the back of the paddy wagon with Lenny. And my dad, Lenny's my dad's hero. And so my dad's sharing with Lenny this radical act courageous radical act he had just done. And Lenny just looked at him and was like, what are you, a schmuck? Like, what are you doing?
Now, in 1970, your dad said he needed to play more colleges because they get it. In 1992, on the Dick Cavett Show, he said that university crowds don't take risks as much, are unworldly and uninformed. And he referred to the whole movement as a politically sensitive, language policed type of environment. If he were alive today, would he be canceled?
um yeah, I don't know. This whole canceling thing is a little weird. What is it? Is it really happening? Is the culture pushing back on certain things? Yes. Are people, like they did in the 70s, standing up for more ways of allowing people to own their own identities and their own subjective experiences? Yes. Is the tip of the arrow of any cultural movement too hard, too inflexible, too unwilling to see nuance? Yes. This is what we are in as a culture. We are absolutely in the expansion of ways of uh, expanding our idea of what identity and subjective experience is for people around gender, around what they call themselves, and also a real, this is part of the thing that America never did. It never really came to terms with our innate racism and our innate misogyny and all of that. So this is one way we're coming to terms with it. Has it created a lot more kerfuffle for free thinkers and free speakers in the world? Yes. Is anyone really canceled? Yeah, some people got canceled for sexual abuse, for some really inappropriate and probably some illegal for sure, and some bordering on should be illegal behavior. Yes. Um, but Dave Chappelle's still making millions of dollars and making the specials and saying whatever the hell he wants to say. I'm not a person that really is fond of his work right now, but I would stand by to protect his right to say it 100%.
Right.
There's a lot of growing pains going on in the culture and the whole Donald Trump thing, really sharpened the edges with all of this. And so now it's all being politicized and used against each other. And it's being used by the powers that be, um, to divide us even more, instead of being able to sit down and have a nuanced conversation about a generation who's questioning who they are and how they want to be called and all of that. And And I do think, I know some academics. I think in academia, it has become intolerable in that setting for sure. Which means that academia needs our concept of academia, the institution of academia probably needs to change also. It's too bad because it is nice, to think that we could have some protected ivory tower space where we could just think about concepts and things like that all day. I mean, a place that's supposed to empower free thinking is limiting speaking so much. It's like just the strange irony of that is just too much. Yes, I mean, I know, and